Hi again, this is Instructor Hollon, and this lecture is on the nature of truth. Specifically, it discusses rationalism, empiricism, the truth condition of knowledge, and the problem of skepticism. Our discussion begins with the contrast between empirical and necessary truth. We can define empirical truth in the following way. Empirical. A statement or proposition is true because of experience. And it is generally held that this type of truth is known, what we say in Latin, a posteriori, after experience. These truths are known from or after experience, and in many cases, we think that what is known could have been different. So philosophers also call these contingent truths. For example, there are no rabbits in Antarctica. Okay. The evolutionary history could have been different, and very tough rabbits could have evolved in Antarctica. Maybe we might have identified a different region of the globe and called that Antarctica, and it could have been populated by rabbits. So the idea is that empirical truth is often thought as synonymous with contingent truth. So they're not necessary truths. That's the main takeaway from the traditional understanding definition of empirical truth. And those are, again, known a posteriori, or after experience. For more discussion, see Payne, 2015, pages 50 to 57, and McLaughlin, 2017, pages 34 to 43 and 78 to 84. Now we also have the definition for necessary truth. A statement or proposition is true because of reason. It is generally held that this type of truth is known a priori, without experience. These types of truths are said to be known apart from experience because they are necessary and can be known through use of reason alone. For example, truths of arithmetic or logic. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is necessary. We don't have to go and count and make sure that every time we have 2 things here and 2 things there, we have 4 all together. We just know that independently of experience, right? And so the idea is that those types of truths are necessary. They couldn't be different. For more discussion, see Payne 2015, 38 to 49, and McLaughlin 2017, pages 25 to 33 and 85 to 95. So notice that sharp distinction and contrast there between empirical contingent truth and necessary unchanging truth, right? Truths of reason. Okay. So that was a common classification historically in discussion in the history of philosophy. Now, having presented that distinction, think about the way our authors talk about the contrast between empiricism and rationalism in general. Now, empiricism is typically defined as the view that all knowledge is based on experience. Rationalism is defined as the view that knowledge is based on reason. All right, those basically neatly track the previous distinctions between empirical and necessary truth, or contingent versus necessary truth. Truths by experience, truths by reason. Now, some interesting developments have taken place in modern times that have challenged this traditional way of classifying these categories, these types of these distinctions in the study of truth. So to be precise, the a posteriori and the a priori, truths known after experience, by experience, and truths known apart or without experience. Truth was thought to correspond neatly to contingent and to the contingent and necessary distinction. All right, but Kripke, in his work Naming and Necessity, published in 1972, which collects some of his lectures, showed that we may also empirically discover necessary truths. So he challenges that sharp distinction. And his example is, we discovered that water is made of H2O, or that the morning star is the evening star. These are in fact the same planetary body. We, in the ancient world, didn't know that, and now we do. So the idea here is that identity statements are guaranteed to be true in every possible world, right? Everything is necessarily what it is and not something else. So if we're talking about Socrates, Socrates is necessarily Socrates. If there was a different parallel world or another possible world where we were talking about someone different, we wouldn't call them Socrates, right? But if we tried to talk about Socrates in another possible world, we'd be talking about how Socrates may or may not have been different in this world. Or if we think possible worlds are real, it would have to be a counterpart of Socrates, right? Socrates in this world is different from Socrates in this other world. So then that Socrates really isn't Socrates, right? It's counterpart one Socrates or something like that. Think of the new Marvel movies where we have the multiverse theory to help get your mind around that. These are different versions of Tony Stark or of the Scarlet Witch or whatever, but they're not the same people from this other parallel world or whatever. In our case, we use the semantics of possible worlds. So what Kripke is saying is, okay, well, if we're really talking about Socrates, the Socrates we know, certain things are true of him, and they have to be true of him because that's what make him him. And so these are caught up with what we refer to as identity statements. And so his idea is that because things are necessarily then what they are, they have this property of being self-identical as the result of possible world semantics, contingency, and necessity. In possible world semantics, we can empirically discover necessary truths when we discover things because they are necessarily what they are, and they have that property, okay? And his famous example was water is H2O. It's not that hard to really follow, and it's interesting that it challenges the older view that there was a nice sharp distinction between empirical versus necessary truth. Only truths of reason were necessary. What Kripke is arguing is no, some empirical truths that we discover can be necessary, and they're not necessary because of truths of reason like arithmetic or whatnot. But you might think, well, they still end up being logically necessary properties in possible world semantics, right? But they still affect what we discover a posteriori. Okay? That's the important thing. We discover the necessary truths. They're not just known by reasonable reflection from the armchair. Okay, so Kripke has challenged this older tradition, but we won't go further into detail on the challenge there. I just note it in the introduction course for the sake of precision, but we're going to leave that argument, that subject aside, that development aside further. Okay, it's enough to explain things up to present. So next, we're going to move on to the problem of skepticism. Here we pick up with Descartes' idea that knowledge requires certainty and his method of doubt. For a description of Descartes' approach, see Levin, 2020, pages 39 to 42, and McLaughlin, 2017, pages 25 to 33. So we move on to Hume's presentation of the problem. Hume picks up with Descartes' arguments. Okay, Descartes had tried to show that we could have knowledge of the external world just based on our knowledge that we exist. We can't doubt our own existence because you have to exist to doubt. The cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. From there he reasoned that God must exist, and God wouldn't allow us to be systematically deceived, or God would be the devil, right? But since God is not the devil but God wouldn't let us be deceived. So from rock bottom, our knowledge of ourself and knowledge of God, we know that our external perceptions are accurate and true. Now, Hume challenges this argument and says, what if we're not convinced by that God card there, right? um, but we still have this idea that, okay, we have our perceptions and we can doubt the reality of the external world. Okay, so Hume picks up with the problem and then tries to just accent it and say, this is in fact a real problem. Descartes didn't solve it satisfactorily. Okay, he claimed that we can only ever know the content of our own minds. And since we filter our experience of the external world through our own minds, we can never really be sure that there is an external world. Okay, so this is the classic problem of skepticism. And you can think of a way to explain it very simply like this. We cannot step outside of our experiences from like a third person perspective to see if our experiences map up with how things are in the world. We can never escape our perceptions to do that, right? An out of body third person confirmation, maybe something like that. And so because we can never do that, we're always confined by our perceptions. We can never know that our perceptions are accurate or not, right? That's the problem of skepticism. So we can never know if there is an external world or not, is what he's saying. Now, notice that he assumes Descartes' method and principle of that knowledge requires certainty. Most epistemologists will question that principle today, because there are many examples where we have knowledge but we don't have certainty. And this is really everything we know by induction or probability. So what Hume did was Hume rejected all induction, all probability knowledge, all knowledge based on probability. It's a very big pill to swallow. I know for sure I have rent next month, but Hume says no, you don't, because it's in the future and possibly the Earth could be struck by an asteroid and you won't be here. But I would say that's very improbable. We know a lot about astronomy today, and there's no asteroid come and hit the Earth tomorrow, so I think I'm going to have to wake up tomorrow and get to work. And I think next month I have rent. But so Hume's argument requires some rather large pills to swallow. Yeah, there are some real serious questionable assumptions that he makes, and to be consistent, there's a high cost to pay for his skepticism. It doesn't look realistic since there are many examples for knowledge based on probability and inductive reasoning. So the part of the way that philosophers looked at the problem of skepticism now is that the way it was generated was problematic, and the principle upon which it was based, this Cartesian principle that all knowledge requires certainty, is itself questionable. How do we know that's true anyways too? So we can reject Descartes' principle there and avoid this problem of skepticism as it was presented by Hume by simply saying knowledge doesn't require certainty, and that's how we can know that there is an external reality. It's based on our experience of reality, and we just don't need to be certain about that, but we just know, right? Probably, based on probability, again. Our experience of reality is such that we can confirm that light photons interact with objects in the world and bounce off our retinas, and through the process of transduction, electromagnetic signals are sent to our brain, and we experience some such and such. And we know that process is going on. We've confirmed that. And that's an external process. So Hume's like, no, but we're like, all right. It's very hard to swallow Hume's argument there, but he was working with what they knew at that time. And we know a lot more about perception, physics, and so you might question then this principle that knowledge requires certainty. Okay. Now Kant addressed this problem in his own way and a little differently from an externalist response. Okay. So we'll look at Kant's response to the problem, but I wanted to mention my response and cite more current work by epistemologists like Jonathan Bogle. and other epistemologists who have written on this problem of skepticism. We still talk about it, but we really don't think it's as problematic as Hume had thought. And there are still skeptics as well, but the very minority position. Okay, and for the arguments that I've mentioned. So also other arguments include principal arguments like simplicity. It's just simpler to think that our perceptions are accurate because they help us negotiate the world accurately than that it's deceived and somehow still works, right? I mean, so subtle arguments like that lead epistemologists to doubt Hume's global external world skepticism today. Okay, but Kant had a clever way to respond to it, and what he said was that given that any experience whatsoever presupposes certain a priori or necessary truths, and that these truths tell us something about our experiences and so are not trivial, it follows that the problem of skepticism is a needless worry. So what Kant is saying is that, look, to have any experience at all, any possible experience, certain things need to be true. And so we can just focus on that. And we have knowledge based on what needs to be true to have experience. And so we don't have to worry further about other aspects of experience involving the external world or not. We can be fine with what we know about all the necessities of all possible truth. Of all possible experience whatsoever, and that will just set aside Kant's worry about external world realism or realism, right? So this is a clever way to say we just don't need to worry about Hume's skepticism about the external world. Whether it exists in some defined way or not, we know for sure that any experience requires certain truths, and we have identified some of these truths. You might think about identity claims like the aforementioned one by Kripke. Everything isn't necessarily what it is. Of course, Kant wasn't using possible world semantics and would identify these with categories of experience. If you have to read more Kant, and we won't go into specific details of his system, but he identifies he proposes a list of these necessary truths and says, well, we can just begin with these, and knowledge has to the other truth claims that follow from that are all true then because they're based on this ground, and that's all we need. Okay, now, some people haven't been satisfied with that. We still wonder, then is there an external world? That question comes up. But it's an interesting way to deal with the problem, saying it's not a worry, and it kind of a forerunner for pragmatism and the way pragmatism deals with the problem of the external world, of the existence of the external world. And so let's look at 3 different theories of truth and how these theories kind of help us understand Hume's problem of skepticism a little better too by drawing definitions of truth into sharp focus. Okay, so we turn first to the correspondence theory of truth. This theory of truth says a statement or proposition is true if and only if it corresponds to reality, and it's the most simplest and most common theory of truth, right? The cat is on the mat is true if and only if the cat is in fact on the mat. That's the idea. Okay, for a discussion of correspondence theory of truth, see Archie and Archie, citing Bertrand Russell, What is Truth? 2017, pages 359 to 368. Now, there are some issues that arise with the correspondence theory of truth because there are examples of truths that we do not think correspond to something in the way the correspondence theory of truth says. So think about truths of logic or arithmetic. What 2 plus 2 equals 4 looks true, but what if we don't think there are numbers like the number 2 to which the statement would refer to make it true? Or what about the past or the future? If we don't think the future is real yet because we're in the present, then future tense statements couldn't be true because they don't correspond to anything out there in the future yet, right? But there do appear to be true future tense statements, like the ones I'd mentioned responding to Hume. I'm really sure I have rent next month. I wish I could get away without it, but nope. I think it's true. So that future tense statement, though, doesn't correspond to any reality out there because the future isn't real yet. So at least on one theory of time, we have to do some work with a theory of time to try to maybe generate um, some defense for the correspondence theory of truth. But then the same problem arises for other things too, aesthetic statements or ethical statements, certain statements where we wonder about the nature of the referent. Okay, well, we know that the statement Sherlock Holmes is a detective. We know that's true because he's a detective in the novels. But there is no real person named Sherlock Holmes who is a detective. That's not true, right? So then there becomes this kind of fuzzy area there because it looks like in some sense Sherlock Holmes is true, is sorry, Sherlock Holmes is a detective, is true, right? But it doesn't correspond to any reality. Um, that is, there is no Sherlock Holmes, in fact, who is a detective, right? Uh, so in order to respond to some of these problems, other theories of truth have been developed, and one is called the coherence theory of truth. This is an alternative theory of truth. The coherence theory of truth says that a statement or proposition is true if and only if it coheres with our web of beliefs. So what makes for truth is the way the truth is integrated or nested in your systematic web of beliefs, the way it relates to other beliefs. If things cohere in the right way, that's what makes for truth, not correspondence to external reality. Okay, so truths of arithmetic might be thought to be true because when we do enough work with arithmetic, we see that there's a nice system and order to our beliefs, our mathematical state, arithmetic, to the mathematical beliefs, the statements in arithmetic, and so forth. 1 plus 1 equals 2, and we know, so well, 2 plus 2 equals 4, and 4 plus 4 equals 8, and there's this nice consistency in the ordering of the beliefs once we start to do that kind of work. And we think, well, that's all that makes for truth then. So we can have truth in this system without concern for external correspondence, and we can avoid these problems that when we have examples where truth doesn't seem to require a correspondence condition, right? And also uh, other problems. Well, other problems have also arisen for the coherence theory of truth, though, as well. Okay, so one concern is that with the coherence theory of truth, once we have this internalized system of coherence, just imagine that you could be this way. You could have some system of belief that is ordered, but in fact, many of your external beliefs about reality could be false. Right? You could tell a neat, ordered, fictional story, but it's a fiction, and so it doesn't correspond to reality, right? So we could think of these kinds of this discrete, isolated, ordered webs of belief in cases where they would in fact not correspond accurately to reality, but we don't want to say that they're true, okay? Uh, because they don't correspond to any known reality. So there's this concern now with the coherence theory of truth. It helps solve some of the problems that the correspondence theory of truth faced, and then it ends up facing some of its own problems. Okay, so to deal with some of those problems, other theories of truth have been developed, and one of those theories is called the pragmatic theory of truth. Now, the pragmatic theory of truth is similar to the coherence theory, builds on it though. Okay. Now, the pragmatic theory of truth says a statement or proposition is true if and only if it helps us function better or to negotiate our experience of the external world effectively or better to survive, right? So all we're really concerned about then on the pragmatic theory of truth is really just rock bottom, what works. When I go out the door of the office, when I go into the kitchen and make coffee, I just want to be sure I'm not hit by a car, right? The road is outside, and that's where the automobiles are. That's where our cars are, right? And so as long as we can negotiate the world and survive, and we interact with each other effectively, that's all we need for truth, right? It almost kind of reminds you of Kant's idea. Certain things have to be true for experience. Well, we don't know if they have to be true in this case, but we take them as true, and that's fine, right? So the pragmatic theory of truth responds to Kant's skepticism by saying, we just don't need to worry about that. And in fact, pragmatic philosophers of pragmatism respond to these classic problems in metaphysics in the same way by saying we just don't need to be concerned with metaphysics because we can just settle for what works, right, and keep things very simple. This is a very popular, dominant view in American philosophers in modern times. Okay. For more work on the coherence theory of truth, see Archie and Archie, citing Harold Joachim, Coherence Theory of Truth, 2017, page 330 to 339. And for more information, discussion of the pragmatic theory of truth, see the reading in Archie and Archie, citing William James, Pragmatic Theory of Truth, 2017, pages 344 to 355. All right, so we've talked about theories of truth, classifications for knowledge, the truth condition, and the problem of skepticism in some detail. In this lecture, I've also included multimedia in the Engaging with the Materials link, and please feel free to review that material when you can. All the multimedia is designed to be helpful in explaining some of the content that we're covering in our weekly modules. Okay, thank you for joining me, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out by email or stop in on Zoom office hours, and we can talk about anything that interests you in the assigned readings, the concepts, the content, my comments, the activities, anything like that. Okay, so it's been a pleasure, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye-bye.